So I wanted to create one of those satisfying, perfectly looping animations. So in this video I'm going to take you through the whole process, from modeling and animating dominoes and dealing with a few unexpected challenges along the way. Let's get into it. First things first was modeling the domino. A really important bit of the animation was actually the domino itself. So I wanted to get the domino right. First, I found the standard size of a regular domino to use as reference. The modeling itself was very straightforward. I just created a rectangle with rounded corners and a simple bevel. It's very simple, but it's all we need for the domino shape. Up next was texturing the domino. I set up the UV map and exported it as a PNG, then brought it into Affinity to create a few domino textures. Since most dominoes have an indent on the dots, I wanted to replicate that. So I used Materialize to make a height map and a normal map for some added depth. I realized halfway through that it probably wouldn't even be noticeable in the final animation, but whatever. After that, I brought everything back into Blender, applied the textures, and set it up so that each domino I duplicate, I could just apply the textures and it would just change. With the dominoes done, I started building a sort of mechanical arm. I wanted to look simple, something like a claw inspired by Wall-E, but way more basic of course. My goal was to have this arm pick up and set down the domino in the animation. Now, this is where the problem started. I tried setting up a basic animation rig to control the claw's open and close movement. The idea was to use an empty sphere and move it on the Z-axis to control the opening and the closing. So moving the sphere up would open the claw and moving it down would close it. I wasted around 30 minutes trying to get this to work with constraints and stuff like that. It was absolutely useless. Once I finally moved on from the claw, I started building the full scene. I set up an orthographic camera since it's ideal for this type of animation and began positioning everything so that it fit nicely within the frame. So, the animation itself. Here's the basic idea for the animation. The claw lowers a domino, laces it on the ground and goes back out of the frame. After all the dominoes are lined up, another claw from the side will push the first domino to start a chain reaction. Finally, once everything has settled down, a sort of sweeper arm pushes them out of the frame, making the animation loop. I started with one domino, then just duplicated it to fill the frame. Blender's rigid body simulations were a huge help for making the dominoes fall realistically. If you had to animate them with keyframes, it would take forever. This is where things got really interesting. I ran into some weird issues with the physics. For some reason, well, I know the reason, but the dominoes started acting up like they had a mind of their own. After about an hour, I finally figured out the problem. I'd accidentally hidden some dominoes in my viewport and forgot to remove them from the physics calculation. Blender was still calculating physics on these invisible dominoes, which threw everything off. Once I fixed that, everything ran smoothly and I was able to bake the physics. Next up was texturing the scene itself. Since I already had textures set for the dominoes, I just applied different textures to each one. I also added a brushed metal texture I found on Polygon, I think. It works really well for the mechanical arms. Then I moved on to the ground texture. Initially I found a pattern from Unsplashed, but it wasn't looking great. So I switched to a wood texture instead, which looked way better. After finalizing textures and checking the camera angles, I packed all the textures into the blend file to get everything ready for rendering. To save a bit of time, I used a render farm for the animation, which cost around $15, and it finished in just about an hour. Afterwards, I downloaded all the frames and used Blender's video editor to compile everything. Okay, so at this point the animation was done, but the most important aspect was sound design. Without good sound design, the animation wouldn't be satisfying, so to speak. Now, sound design was a bit of a challenge since I am not an expert at all and I do not have a subscription for paid sound effects. So I ended up using Pixabay, which is actually a great free resource. It took a bit of time to find just the right sounds, but I don't think it turned out bad. I used DaVinci Resolve to edit the entire video sequence, mixing in sound effects along the way and using a bit of the Fairlight editor as well. If you'd like to download the blend file, I've included a link in the description where you can download the file entirely for free. Enjoy. And finally, here is the final looping animation.